Pop Shield, a long-form discussion podcast about musical topics both past and present. I'm Gabe, and I'm joined as always by Dan.
Hello.
And Darren.
Hello.
So I like to start each episode by asking you guys what you've been listening to lately.
I've been listening to a lot of Earth since they announced a new record and a tour, which they're coming here for. So, digging back through the whole discography.
Yeah, I was checking out this debut album by a band called Sasami. It just came out like a week ago.
What does it sound like?
Well, it was a recommendation that I noticed on Mitski's Instagram.
Of course.
So that'll probably be enough because it's kind of in that vein.
Nice. I'm going to see Mitski next month, actually.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's not fair.
But I had another concert experience, semi-concert experience, that I want to tell you guys about. Get your take on. It's kind of like a, am I out of touch or is it the kids who are wrong situation, okay? So I attempted last night to see Earth Eater, not to be confused with Earth Eater, at the Hideout in Chicago. And basically, try to keep it short, everything I could find, it just said the Earth Eater was playing. And it's pretty avant-garde, high art type of stuff. And I'm just sort of used to, I was expecting like chairs and, that's the only performer. There aren't going to be a bunch of openers and stuff like that. So anyway, I get there like an hour early. It's a really cool bar, the Hideout. Booze is flowing, having a good time. About 9, this DJ starts playing and they're fun. It's kind of like a... 10 Tricks Point Never kind of a vibe. And, it's like, it's not really danceable, but it was like sort of a fun, good mood. Okay. After they play for a while, this other DJ comes out and, again, it's pretty abstract stuff. Pretty abrasive kind of awe-techery type of stuff. And I mention this because I've been to many shows, like DJ type shows, and people expect kind of a full night of, dancing. You know what I mean? It's not uncommon for there to be like, 4 or 5 openers before the headliner plays at like 1 or something. However, this was not really danceable, in my opinion, and everybody's just kind of standing watching. Then at about, 10 something, this woman comes on, and I don't know what Earth Eater looks like, so I thought maybe this is Earth Eater. And it's somebody named Matches, it turns out. They're Chicago person, and it's like the most, it was really cool. It was really avant-garde, like Tony Conrad type of shit, where she's just like playing this like droning thing on what sounds like something making synthesized noise, but it's not even meant to be a synthesizer. And then these 2 girls beside her are like hitting tuning forks, and it's like warping and bending like in this feedback kind of way, and she starts like droning on the violin, and it went up for a full hour. Okay, and then after she finishes, she says, stick around, Earth Eater is next, okay? At this point, it's like midnight, all right? And I am just so out of steam. I don't see any signs of Earth Eater, like, getting ready to start. And so I just fucking left. I was like, I had a full day, like, walking around Chicago. Does that sound insane to you, or am I just getting too old to go to concerts?
You're getting a little old there. It's midnight. That's a little old.
I was going to say, but he's preaching to the choir here. We're all we're all up there.
Yeah, we're all older than him.
Yeah.
It's not that it's like midnight necessarily. It's that since 8 o'clock, I've been like standing watching abstract, sound.
No, I feel you. I hate when bands have like a shit ton of openers. When I saw Autechre, there was like some DJ, and so my wife and I like purposely came like 45 minutes late, and we got there and the DJ was already in the middle of playing, so I was like, oh good, we'll only have to deal with this for 10-15 minutes. Wrong, it was like another hour and a half we still had to listen to. I hate that shit. It's so like nobody wants to see that, right? Like everybody just is there.
I know. It was like a good vibe, but I wish they would have like said anywhere on any promotional material at all, my ticket or anything, that there were going to be so many openers, because I would have like shown up at 11 or something. And instead it was like I'm just like wiped out I've been, because you drink to kind of crescendo during the headliner, but instead I crescendoed way too early.
Yeah, it's like you had a full night.
I know
the main event had even occurred. Yeah, I don't blame you at all. I mean, the idea of like just kind of filling the club with like, a bunch of different bands and DJs or whatever, that's fine, but like make it clear that you're not really meant to get here at 7 p.m. or whatever.
Yeah, I know. They sent out a tweet. It's like, at 9:00 tonight, Earth Eater descends on the Hideout. That was wrong, okay? She hadn't descended at midnight. So, I mean, really, the date of the concert was incorrect, and she didn't play till the following day. Oh, my God. Anyway, I guess we should get into today's topic. March 1st, that was just 2 weeks ago now, marked the 50th anniversary of a pretty mythic event in rock history. The night Jim Morrison had a complete meltdown on stage in Miami and allegedly, we don't want to get sued, tried to incite a riot by exposing himself and possibly masturbating while screaming obscenities at the audience. Or as Dan likes to say, he whipped his dick out. Kept sending us texts along those lines. For the record, Morrison maintained his innocence, and the case was still unresolved when he died on July 3rd, 1971. Fortunately, thank God, the governor of Florida officially pardoned Morrison in 2010. I really love that.
Was that Rick Scott that did that?
Charlie Chris.
Oh, okay. So
Rick Scott would do no
We
such
should
thing.
mention that we're all three from Florida. Also,
yeah. So we've been following this story closely for 50 years now.
Our whole lives.
In any case, this got us thinking about the Doors and their legacy. Everybody, including us, seems to go through a passionate Doors phase in their youth, but at some point, at least among the indie crowd, decides their albums are cringy, pretentious, or worse, irredeemable dad rock relics. So we decided to revisit and rank the Doors' studio discography, not counting the post-Morrison albums, I'm afraid, though honestly, those could be fun to review sometime. But we're going to try to figure out how this discography holds up roughly 5 decades later. So let's start by going over our personal histories with the Doors. Dan, did you kind of have that experience that I think is typical of a lot of music fans that I just mentioned?
Oh yeah. The Doors were like one of the first bands that I like really got into. It was like them and the Beatles, and I read like every book that was out. I read like all of Jim Morrison's like stupid ass fucking poetry books. I've read them all. I watched that shitty Oliver Stone movie.
Oh yeah.
I've spent a lot of my my early days listening to, reading about, and thinking about the Doors.
Yeah, I think, Gabe, you like kind of perfectly summed up my experience with the Doors. I was just a massive fan. I don't know if you remember, but like I had this enormous poster of Jim Morrison in my bedroom, larger than any poster on my wall. It was I don't know what it was, but I, was just totally caught up in it. I tried to write my own like terrible poetry, just trying in any way to like emulate Jim Morrison, but boy, do I feel like totally different about that. Like looking back just kind of makes me cringe about myself, to be honest.
So you guys would say that like now, I mean, before maybe, possibly, if your opinion changed, I don't know yet, but before this week or these last 2 weeks, you were kind of down on the Doors still?
Not me, honestly. I'm not as like obsessed with them as I was when I was a kid, and I probably went through a couple years where I did like, not listen to them and maybe would have said, the first album's good, but that's it or something. But now, no, I still like the Doors. Just not obsessed with. I've like. In my old age, I've realized that like Morrison is like a dickhead and not cool or anything like I thought he was before. Like I've matured on it, but I still like the Doors.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't necessarily like down on them, but I certainly wasn't spinning their records often at all. And going into it like this week, I was having the hardest time understanding how this man died when he was 27. Like. By the time we get to like the later albums, I swear he's like 40 years old. You know what I mean? It's so strange, and we'll get into that. But yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that I kind of struggled to get really into the Doors at that age, and I remember you guys being completely obsessed, and I certainly listened a lot, but I feel like I was more into the mythology than the actual music. You know, I loved that Oliver Stone movie so much. I mean, it was so like glorious, just this like reckless downfall of this tortured genius, you know, and you know, I would think about stuff like in that movie, I haven't seen it in a really long time, but you know, they do this part where like Not to Touch the Earth plays, for example, and he's like on stage just dancing around wildly, and it starts to sort of fade into like this Native American like ritual, and it's like the crowd disappears and he's just like dancing around a fire, and then you know, you put on the album and it's like just a song, you know, it's like just I mean, it's a cool song, but it's like, you know, 1 second you're just like, hello, I love you, and then like the next second it's like this Not to Touch the Earth, and it kind of sucks the like drama out of it. It's just one of their songs, so it just never really stuck with me. And then I will say, without spoiling too much, that actually maybe 5-6 years ago, I for some reason gave the first album another chance and was just like, holy shit, I totally missed this. I mean, this is unbelievable. But it had been a long time since I listened to the rest of their discography, which we will certainly talk about. So we've got 6 albums to rank, 6 studio albums. And let's start with Dan. What is your number 6, your least favorite Doors album?
All right. My least favorite, and I pray to God we all agree on this one, is The Soft Parade. It is.
Yes, that is also my number 6.
Same.
Good.
Wow.
Good.
That's an easy. That was the easy one.
Yeah, I figured that would be the case. It is just an awful record. I never liked this. When I was in my heyday of Doors worship, I still never really liked Soft Parade all that much. You know, I would maybe lie to myself a little bit, but I never really enjoyed it. It's just, you know, it just sounds like a band that is lost its steam. They're adding horns for God knows why. It turns it into like some sort of oldie soft rock kind of thing, and then you know, there's just none of that magical spark of the 2 records that precede it. It just seems like a band that's bankrupt on ideas. This is sort of the first album that you can kind of tell Jim's losing it a little bit.
He's really checked out. I think. He sounds like very uninvolved.
Yeah.
So why did you put it at number 6, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of the same reasons that Dan listed, you know, I do want to mention that I feel like Touch Me is a banger. It's
fantastic.
Is
fantastic
still
song.
Great despite all the horns. But yeah, I mean, it really kind of sums up the problem that I feel like I have with the Doors as a whole, because after like the first 2 albums, just like you mentioned, Dan, it's like they've run out of ideas, and I feel like, and I don't know whether this is true or not, but I feel like there was like some sort of clash between how Morrison, you know, you got to imagine this guy is probably like just way out there, and these other band members, the organ player and the guitarist and the drummer, are like more down to earth, and they're just like wanting to come up with something, and they're probably, you know, I feel like there was just a struggle to like figure out where to go next, you know, and I wonder whether Jim was all that influential in like the music choice for The Soft Parade, or if it was one of the band members that was just like, well, let's just try horns, and you know what I mean, like it just. Yeah. All of the great, like the best part of the Doors, without a doubt, is Jim Morrison, and he is like kind of lost in this record.
Interesting.
I know the answer to your question because of reading every goddamn Doors book. Jim was like fucking trashed when they were making this record. He wasn't there a lot of times. That's why the chorus on Running Blue is Robbie Krieger rather than Jim. He was too drunk to sing it. He
couldn't even wait a day to record it.
Yeah, I know, I guess. This album is the first one, like, Krieger wrote most of it, and even a lot of the lyrics and stuff. It's the first record that's credited to each individual member rather than the band as a whole and everything.
But the producer is, like, supposedly the one who really pushed them to put strings and horns and stuff into it. And from what I understand, the band members were kind of into it, but Morrison really was not. And I think he was already kind of checked out, but that really made him completely uninspired. What's weird about that is that I think you're right, Darren, that the best song is Touch Me. And I kind of like Tell All the People as well. And so, and then what's weird about it is that for basically the entire middle of the album, they just kind of abandon the string horn thing for a while. You know what I mean? And I always want to like this album more than I do. And I often will give it over the years, it's like, I'll give it a listen. And those first two songs, I'm like, this is cool. Because I think at the time, it must have been pretty controversial. From what I understand, it was, sort of seen as them selling out. It doesn't sound like 60s rock. It sounds more like, he's singing with such like a crooning kind of Sinatra type voice on these first two songs, especially. It must have sounded like old, out of date kind of pop or like washed up crossover attempts. And it's weird because in today's world, I don't think it sounds like that at all. I think it sounds kind of inventive and interesting, like an interesting symphonic kind of chamber pop, art pop thing. We've had like this whole tradition since then of, I don't know, just think of how big that became, like the Flaming Lips or something, bringing in those kinds of ideas. Or, I think about like Grizzly Bear or, I don't know, the Gay Parade of Montreal or Beck or something, like this idea of chamber pop, Joanna Newsom, I don't know, incorporating strings and horns and stuff. And it doesn't sound like a sellout move now. In fact, right. I wish the whole album was like that. You know what I mean?
It would make a more sense if the whole album was like that. It seems like such a half-baked idea because it's on half the record only, But one of the big things, it's almost like they're trying to sort of follow the template they had set with the first two records, Like the first two records both end with like a big, long, dramatic piece. And then so this one ends with the Soft Parade, the title track, that's 8 minutes and 40 seconds long. And that song just sounds like a bunch of 30-second ideas
yes.
that weren't
so
that
you don't
great
like it
anyways.
Because I can't decide. It's like I kind of like
I like parts of it. I like some of the parts of it. But it just doesn't work. It just seems like such piecemeal and just lazy. We'll get to it, but on Waiting for the Sun, they had tried to do this sort of similar thing, Celebration of the Lizard, and they could never get it, failed. And this, it's weird that came after this because they failed here too, with the Soft Parade. That song is bad.
Well, what do you think of that song, Darren?
I actually don't mind it. I was going to mention that some of my favorite Doors songs are these like ending tracks that I feel like are, more of Morrison really getting his chance to, jump into the unconscious, man. You know what I mean? Like really get into that. On Waiting for the Sun, like it actually, he doesn't get that because it ends with like 5-1, which is still a phenomenal song. But like, I feel like the one thing that's really missing from that record, and we'll get to that one obviously, is that kind of sprawling the end when the music's over type of track. So I still appreciate the Soft Parade as a song. It's not out of those three that the end and when the music's over, it's obviously hardly compares, but I like it.
Yeah, it's like just such an oddity that it makes it kind of like interesting and fun. It sounds like a Frank Zappa song throughout the big chunk in the middle, like to the point where it's almost like, I would think it was satirizing 60s pop if maybe Morrison was a little more self-aware, which I don't think he totally was, but really Zappa-ish. And then I think that whole blues and then occasionally samba type of part that like stretches out for the last 5 minutes is just great. Like it just grooves so good. And it has that quality that I think you're mentioning, Darren, where they kind of stretch out. That's what's weird is, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but you said, I actually want to talk about this probably when it comes to every album, but that what makes the Doors is Morrison. And I find that the strangest paradox because it's like these stretched out instrumental passages are often like my favorite parts of the Doors. And, it's great actually to have Morrison like kind of wailing or speaking poetry or something over it. And you just kind of know he's like lurking in the background or something and he's going to go nuts. But, those kind of grooves, those jams are really, really great, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. Don't get me wrong, the instrumental portions of that are critical, but, I guess we'll probably addressed this on other albums, but like the worst songs to me are the ones where like Jim Morrison just doesn't really feel present at all. Like he's kind of like constrained into like a simple pop song. You know what I mean? Like nothing real poetic, nothing real like interesting and weird and crazy. It's just him attempting to sing a song, and it's just so uninteresting. You know what I mean?
I think like the reason with these big instrumental things, they like work well, even though I agree with what Darren said that Jim is the best part of the Doors, but I also agree with you, Gabe, that I do enjoy these big instrumental passages. And I think like what it is because, you know, those happen, and then it's always like when it's over, there's a big burst of Jim coming back, you know, and it's always like, yeah, exactly. You're always like, I don't know, like imagining what he would be doing on stage, because, you know, like he'd be going nuts or something, you know, so you kind of think about that
or something, you know?
Yeah, he's got his dick out. Yeah, exactly. Carrying a lamb. It's just like it's making you like want Jim to come back, you know, but not in like a negative, like, you know, I'm bored of this instrumental, you know, you just like want to see him explode back at you. And I don't think the Soft Parade, the song, ever does that. And most of the old, you know, the other longer songs, The End, Light My Fire, and all, they all have that like big explosion. When the music's over, I think has the best one. Not to jump too far ahead or anything, but, you know, like, though we don't get any of that on this record. In fact, like, I don't think they even played many of these songs live too much.
Imagine it would be Miami, some of those.
Yeah, the Miami show is for the Soft Parade tour, and while they didn't play many songs at all, the only one they tried from this is Touch Me, but I think they played like 2 bars of it before Jim called it off.
That's great.
But one interesting thing about this record came out 2 days before the first moon landing. How about that? It's pretty neat, right?
Well, I don't know if I have that much more to say other than the first 2 songs are cool and inventive and almost represent like an interesting path that I kind of wish the Doors would have like taken, or at least devoted a whole album to. And then I'll say that like Shaman's Blues is kind of a cool song.
I sort of like that song. Yeah.
I like spirally high guitar thing. But basically the rest of it is just, I mean, we get into these kind of like just totally forgettable anonymous filler type things. Mm-hmm. And then we get into like Runnin' Blue and Wishful Sin, where the strings come back and stuff, and they're actively bad songs. And then, like we said, I think the Soft Parade is like weird enough that it's kind of a must listen type of a thing. But is there anything else you guys have to say about this one?
I think that about covers it for that.
Yep. All right. Well, we can go back and compare and contrast as much as we want, jump all over the place. But Dan, what is your number 5 Doors album?
All right, number 5, I've got Morrison Hotel.
Me too.
Me too.
God, I wonder if
what if we just have the same? Yeah, what if we just have the same list?
Wow.
Wait, I have a question. How quickly did you guys put your list together? Was it real difficult? Did you struggle at all?
I did it before I re-listened to everything. I was like, I'm gonna figure out my list just from memory, and I did it, and I just to see if it would change, with age or whatever, and it didn't. So I kind of put mine together fairly easily.
No, I put mine together like moments ago because it was like I knew what would be at the bottom and I knew what would be at the top, right. But then the middle, it was, I will say that honestly, like the Doors. I mean, the Soft Parade is not good, but kind of other than that, these are, I would say, all strong albums. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know.
All right, so you're about to talk shit about Morrison Hotel then.
Well,
so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Morrison Hotel, I remember in my youth, I used to like really love this record a lot. But this, again, I feel like has a lot of Jim kind of like in like a checked out sort of mode, you know what I mean? Not at nearly as much as the Soft Parade, but like, for instance, I have a really hard time listening to Roadhouse Blues, and I know that's like...
Wow!
I know, but
that's
listen, hear me out. They do it so much better live. Like, there is like a live record, most of their live records actually start with this song, and he's just so much more lively. Like, the songs just like bump. live, you know, and here it just feels so like, I don't know, it feels so uninspired.
Strange.
Yeah.
I sort of agree with you. This record is another Morrison's a little checked out. I think he's a little less checked out than on Soft Parade, and that's why I like it. But this one is, you know, if this was their only record, you know, if they didn't release anything else, this was their first and last record, you know, they would be like one of those sort of bargain bin bands, I think. And like maybe you'd stumble on this, get it for cheap, and then, you know, there's a couple bangers on here. You'd enjoy it, but you know, that would be the end of it. I don't think they would be, you know, mythic or legendary or anything. It's just an okay record, you know. It's not bad. It's not great. It's just an all right record. And
I mean, that's kind of my question about particularly this period. You know, maybe this will step on things a little bit, but it's like I constantly struggle with the idea of the Doors. Do they just become sort of an ordinary band, like toward the end of their career?
It sure seems like it. Like just a rock band, you know?
Yeah, like, I mean, Dan, would you say there's something like kind of, you were just kind of saying the opposite, but like, is there something special about the Doors on Morrison Hotel? Like, this is the Doors, or are we just saying like this could be anybody?
You know, I don't think it's quite this could be anybody. But now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it could be. I'm looking at the track listing again, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, nothing here. If somebody was like, I've never heard the Doors before, make me a playlist. I don't know if anything would really, you know, make it from this. Maybe Roadhouse Blues, possibly Waiting for the Sun, but I wouldn't want to confuse them since that's not actually on the record it's on.
I mean, this is a weird album, right? Because basically, it was talked about as a return to form. It's the follow-up from
I think
Soft
that just
Parade.
means no horns, though.
Yeah, basically. But, you know, it was like Soft Parade was such a critical and commercial, I think, disappointment. And this came out and it was all like, oh, they're returning to their roots, back to basics, you know. And I think it was really widely acclaimed at the time and is now a little bit, you know, lower in their discography. I kind of want to ask later on, does the just existence of LA Woman make this feel more underwhelming?
Yes.
Because they are kind of like dipping their toe into the blues thing that they will then kind of like totally go for. But what makes it so weird, right, is we kind of kick off with the blues. We got Roadhouse Blues. Track 3, we got You Make Me Real. And it's interesting because, you know, instead of like the electric piano, we've got the sort of like a honky-tonk piano that Ray Manzarek is playing. And it's just like, you know, kind of a intriguing, interesting new sound. Peace Frog is a real slapper.
Yeah, that's a great song.
I would put that. I take it back. I would put Peace Frog on that playlist. I'm saying.
Yeah, okay,
yeah,
that is a banger.
Good.
Yeah,
that would have to be. But then we've got some weird stuff because Waiting for the Sun is obviously a holdover from the album before this, Waiting for the Sun. And it sounds much more psychedelic than the kind of blues direction that they're moving into. Indian Summer is even weirder. It's from the sessions for their first album, and it sounds like The End in miniature to me.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds so similar, and he sounds noticeably younger to me, and it just feels so out of place. And yet, because early in the record we have Waiting for the Sun, later in the record we have Indian Summer, right in the middle we have Blue Sunday, which I think is kind of a nice, like, almost psychedelic kind of thing, and it's cool how Peace Frog flows right into it. And so it's kind of like a bluesy record that has these pepperings of their earlier selves, and it sounds totally disjointed, but then I feel like when I listen to it, it flows kind of nicely. I mean, certainly better than Soft Parade, you know?
You know, this record sort of feels like an EP with some B-sides like tacked on to make a full LP. Because like you said, you know, a lot of it is holdovers from 2 records ago, 3 records ago, and it's some of the songs individually are good. I don't think any of the songs are bad, except maybe Land Ho.
That's weird. That's a weird one.
Yeah, I don't really like that
one.
track
I don't really like Ship of Fools, Land Ho, and The Spy. Like all 3 of those, I could.
Wow, I kind of like The Spy, but I
like The Spy.
What I find interesting is like Ship of Fools and Land Ho, so that would be like the end of side A and then the beginning of side B. They're both kind of goofy songs that then like weirdly have like a strange middle section, both of them, that gets kind of like drony and strange. Where it's like, I mean, especially on like Land Ho, I think there's just like a strange like note. Like it's like the guitar and bass and stuff just eventually are just holding one note, and it's just getting sort of trippy and strange, and then it kind of like goes back into this silly, goofy honky tonk shit, and it kind of makes me think of an interesting middle point, because I think, not to spoil it, but on LA Woman, they'll do a little bit better pulling like this kind of dark undercurrent out of the blues. And those songs, they give a little taste of it that I find sort of interesting in like a Doors historian kind of way, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean this album is basically LA Woman light. It's they haven't perfected it yet. No beard on Jim on the cover. He's chubby, but he's no beard yet. So he's not quite like mastered the blues.
Yeah,
a little bit.
What do you guys think of the closing track, Maggie McGill?
They've completely abandoned the big giant closer, which is good. If you can't do it right, don't do it. It's an okay song. It doesn't really feel like a big giant, a big ending statement or anything.
Right.
It's just another song.
It grooves good though. It's got like a nice groove, kind of similar to like the last stretch of the Soft Parade title track. It's got a nice groove, and it's getting harder. And I feel like on some of the songs on this album, they're like playing the blues, but they don't sound like a kind of muscular blues band, and they kind of get that right on LA Woman. But the last song, for some reason, sounds the heaviest and like the best indicator of the quality that we'll see on LA Woman. How do you feel, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to mention that this album came out 3 years after their debut, but it sounds as if 10 or 15 years have gone by, and they're just returning from like a long hiatus or something.
It's true.
It really is nuts. Like when you look at the looking at the Doors, finding the Doors, many years after their end, you just sort of think like, oh, this band was around 15, 20 years or something. But like, it's really nuts how much stuff they released in such a short period of time, and how much they changed between records. From the first record to LA Woman is almost a different band, and it's only like 10 years. It's really crazy.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. One thing I hesitate to bring up now, but I kind of have this feeling that like, well, maybe I should save it, but it's like early on, they are this incredible synthesis of a lot of different things. And then it's like, as their sort of career comes to an end, they can't synthesize them anymore. They just are like, all right, here's a blues song, here's a like strange Baroque pop song, like, and then they eventually settle on like just the blues or whatever. But it's odd. You mentioned it before, but that they just emerge so fully formed, and then just can't replicate it or won't even try. I mean, which is it?
I mean, I don't know. It's weird because let's see, Morrison Hotel is like 1970 and LA Woman's 1971. It's like as soon as the 60s like ended, you know what I mean? Like the decade is over, and all of the mystique and all of the high is like all gone. You know what I mean? Like it's just stripped away, and they are just a regular band now. You know what I mean? Like I keep on saying it, but it's just like shocking how different they are between their self-titled and Morrison Hotel and LA Woman,
Yeah, I mean, I just a minute ago said I thought it was like 10 years, but it's only 4, really. I forget. I like nuts. Even I can't even, I know the answer and I can't even wrap my head around it. First record comes out January 4th, 1967, and the last one, LA Woman, April 19th, 1971. That's, I don't think any other band changed so much in such a short amount of time.
So Dan, what's going on with Jim at this time? I don't really remember. Like why, I mean, he starts gaining weight. Is that what the deal is? Like why is he so different?
I guess I think this is sort of like the post Miami whip your dick out, can't get both can't get booked anywhere. I couldn't think of the word. Can't get booked anywhere. So that they weren't really touring and everything, so I think that made Jim's addiction, substance abuse problems way worse because he's just sitting around, bored and everything. So he just eats a lot, apparently. Or the chubbiness is probably from drinking. He was more of a drinker than a hard drug guy, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Everything that I understand, and we'll get into this more, but is that he actually was kind of like excited by the blues direction, but it was like the other stuff he just was, I don't know, couldn't get into. So I think this is him kind of moving on an upswing a little bit. But okay, we can come back to this. I wonder if we're gonna have the same number 4 again. But Dan, what is your number 4?
Yeah, I do wonder. I kind of feel like we might not, but my number 4 is Waiting for the Sun.
Mine too.
Oh no, not for me.
Darren,
not for me.
Finally, okay. Okay, well, Dan, why did you put this at number 4?
I mean, basically now I think we've gotten into the records that are all great. Everything left is fantastic. So it's a little bit of splitting hairs, getting down to this. But of the like sort of psychedelic tinged records, this is the weaker one. We sort of alluded to it earlier, but they wanted to do this big, grand, giant song called "The Celebration of the Lizard," and they just could. They've recorded it over and over and over, just couldn't get it working, and so it's like a little, 5-1 ends it, which is a fantastic song, but it's sort of breaking from their template, and just sort of seems a little unfinished, but a great record nonetheless.
I was really kind of like wobbling between 3 and 4 a lot because, I think that this sort of, it's funny to say like this period of the Doors because, it's like 2 years, the first 2 years versus the second 2 years, but kind of in this early period, I mean, just their sound is so classic and so unique. I mean, just when they're like hitting, like on 5-1 at the end of this record, I mean, one of their best songs, it just sounds like the best 60s band ever, basically. But they have this kind of thing, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but it's kind of like they were working as the house band at the Whiskey A Go-Go, writing a lot of songs, playing a lot. I don't think the drinking had gotten out of control. And it's almost like they wrote all of their good songs then. And then they kind of just kept sort of like stretching it out. Some of these like songs on here are some of their earliest compositions. And, it's not exactly true, but it's just like this early period. They're so inspired. And you just feel like as you go through these first 3 albums, it's more and more like that first wave of inspiration padded with some not so good stuff, some kind of rushed filler that they had to like fill the album. And so this is a hard album because I think the best songs on here are some of the best Doors songs, some of the best like songs of the 60s. And yet it's all over the place. It just sounds like a bunch of outtakes. Like I said earlier, it's hard to move from Love Street to Not to Touch the Earth. It just sounds like, Not to Touch the Earth sounds like the most like, almost like demonic, like just like in that movie, like chanting, running wild around a fire or something. It's
an amazing song.
It's amazing.
That's part of Celebration of the Lizard.
Yeah, it works better in Celebration of the Lizard, but
right. But in this context, it just follows Love Street, which is one of like the cutest like romancy kind of songs that they have, and then it goes into like Summer's Almost Gone, which is one of these. This album also has a lot of like really slow kind of sometimes meandering songs. We got weird stuff like The Unknown Soldier. I think is fantastic, but like, does it need to stop for so long with this like little skit of somebody being shot or whatever? It's just like crazy. And then we get like the My Wild Love is another kind of like, it almost is similar to Not to Touch the Earth in that it's like a weird chant, like a weird summoning some evil spirit or something, and yet it's just like kind of thrown in the middle, like as if it was any other kind of poppy song that they're writing here. It's weird, right?
Yeah, this record doesn't have the greatest sequencing of all. I agree with you. It does sort of feel like a little thrown together. The Unknown Soldier skit is pretty annoying. I think they put that on here because Jim would do it like live, and it's pretty like cool live because he would act like he was getting tied up and shot, and the song would explode. It was that Jim explosion I talked about earlier again. But yeah it kind of falls a little flat on record. They could have done without that. But My Wild Love is great, but in a weird spot. Love Street and Hello I Love You, like those two go good together. They're real similar. But then it's weird to go straight into Not to Touch the Earth. But 5 to 1 is one of the best Doors songs, and probably one of the best songs of the '60s.
And I love Hello I Love You. A lot of people hate
that's a
this
great
song and think it's annoying.
I think that's one of their best singles.
Are you a hater, Darren?
No, I'm not a hater. I'm sitting here thinking about how I'm gonna have to defend this album later on when it gets to my list. Yeah.
If you contrarian put this at 1, I'm gonna drive over to your house and
I'll flip,
punch you in the balls.
All right. Well, then we can save it. We can come back to it and have that fight a little later. But your number 4, Darren, is what?
My number 4 is L.A. Woman.
Okay.
I knew you were gonna do that.
Yeah, I thought you guys were too. I mean, like you said, Dan, I think the next 4 records are all great records. You know what I mean? And to be honest, 2 through 4, I think, could be interchangeable depending on the day and the mood. And that's kind of to me, that's kind of a problem that I have with the Doors, in that I just can't, like, we'll obviously talk about it, but there's just not a whole lot of, like, 10 out of 10 from start to finish, completely solid. You know what I mean? Like, there's always like something that, like, some sort of hiccup or some song that just feels like it doesn't need to be there or whatever. Anyway, but LA Woman is, I guess, of these the later 2 years or whatever, by far the best. I think Bearded Jim is he's fantastic. He's totally different than Jim from 2 years before that or whatever. But I think that the whole blues and the mix of like rock, that whole thing just kind of comes together so well. This album, none of the songs really feel like they are leftovers or B-sides or anything. I feel like they are fresh takes. They seem to flow pretty well together. LA Woman and Riders on the Storm, like absolute great Doors songs.
This is something that, without jumping ahead, on the Doors, the first album, they nail this, where it's like end both side A and side B with like a climactic great song. So in that case it's a Light My Fire and then the end.
Oh yeah.
Then they just like forget to do this, and they kind of forget to like care about sequencing or do any kind of flow basically for all these albums. And then on this one, they fucking nail it again. And it's like, why didn't you just do that the whole time? Because LA Woman and Riders on the Storm, they just end side A and side B so much. And they have these like 7-8 minute songs that kind of anchor the whole thing.
Works so well for them.
Yeah. And it makes like the smaller songs, more fun. Like just the idea that like Love Her Madly is just like this 3-minute great kind of pop song. It hits harder, when you are sort of building to like these big grander gestures. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're like little appetizers for like leading you up to the big old main course. Yeah.
Right, and you can like kind of think of the record as truly as 2 sides, not like just a random spotting of songs, as you sort of mentioned on Waiting for the Sun. But like here, it just, you've got your side A, and when it ends with LA Woman, like there's like a completion to that. You know what I mean? Even if it just existed as an EP, like that feels complete.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, but I think the Doors are like definitely one of those bands that really benefited from the vinyl record and having to flip it.
Yes.
Because those first 2 records and LA Woman both have that side A is a piece, side B is a piece type thing that's sadly lost in the streaming age.
Yeah, but you feel it on this album, and I'll just
you could tell.
sort of
You could guess where the break is if you didn't know.
Yeah, Yeah. And I'll just sort of jump ahead because my number 3 is LA Woman. And I think it's that cohesiveness. That's what makes this one of their best records. It's not that like the material is so great, but it's got this kind of consistent vibe. So stuff like Been Down So Long or Cars Hiss By My Window, they're not super exceptional blues workouts, but Morrison sounds like he's really into it, like he's really having fun and sort of just giving it his all. And the band, you can sort of tell, and from reading a little bit of the backstory, a lot of these songs were sort of built from jams, and you just can tell that, like, I mean, it's just like a great kind of driving record, or just like, because there's so much energy. Everybody just seems like so into it and committed to the project. And then those blues songs give like a nice structure to everything, because something like the Changeling or Love Her Madly, or even some of the weirder stuff like L'America or Hyacinth House is actually kind of really poppy, and then I think it's a little weird. Because there are these super straight blues songs scattered throughout the record, it kind of pulls that part of the song to the fore, So like Love Her Madly is basically kind of a chamber pop song, but because it's in this context, you kind of hear the blues roots of the way that song is written. So even the variation fits into the puzzle. I think that's the best part about this record. One thing I would ask though, The Wasp. I don't think I get this song. Isn't this like a fan favorite or something? Darren, do you like this song?
I don't like that song, actually.
What's up with that song?
I like The Wasp. In fact, and this is very embarrassing, but I quoted The Wasp as my yearbook quote when I was a senior.
Fantastic.
Very
well. Explain it to me. I don't know. What am I missing?
I mean, when I was a kid, it was like, oh fuck, that's some poetry. But like as an adult,
so what was the quote?
Like,
I gotta know what the quote was.
No eternal reward will forgive us now for wasting the dawn, which is incredibly embarrassing. Incredibly so. Yeah, I know. But but I think that's a good example. When I was young, shit like that sounded fucking deep as hell and like super rad. As an adult, it just sounds like nonsense and like some dickhead. But I don't know. It's a cool song because like, like on Strange Days, you have what the hell's the name of that song? The Horse Latitudes, where Jim's just sort of speaking, and it's a little boring. But at least on the Wasp, it's that, but like the band's got like a kind of a groove going behind them, and it's it's just kind of like it's different, and it's pretty neat. I think I don't know if it's like a fan favorite. I don't think I've ever heard
I hate the ending. Like, you go into this like super long instrumental portion, and then it just kind of circles back to this, like, I don't know, I just don't find it all that exciting. Like, it felt like so unnecessary to have to like wrap it up with a repeat of, well, let's tell me about the
No, I can get that, but I don't know. It's just like a fun, different. It's a different piece. There's not another like song, Not by the Doors, that I can think of that reminds me of it.
It's true.
I enjoy that.
I think it's a fun little groove before we get into Riders on the Storm, which is, it's like a top 5 Doors song in my opinion. Sure. It's fantastic. But okay, so let me get this straight. I just jumped ahead with my 3. Dan, we haven't heard your 3.
Yeah, my number 3, not LA Woman. It is Strange Days.
Oh, that's my number 3.
Interesting.
Nice.
Okay.
We're back on track then.
How come?
This one, it seems like a continuation of the first record. And that, that's a good thing and a little bit of a bad thing in the fact that it's retreading quite a bit. But there's some, I mean, When the Music's Over is one of the best Doors songs, probably the best song they would do live. I got real obsessed with Doors bootlegs for a while. Big surprise. But you got tracks on here. I mean, basically everything on this record is good, minus maybe Horse Latitudes.
Yeah.
But even Horse Latitudes,
only like a minute and a half.
Yeah, it is a minute and a half, and it's like a little breakup between Unhappy Girl and Moonlight Drive. But I mean, the title track that's a cool song. You know, it's like
Definitely.
because that was sort of a hit, and it's like a little psychedelic and a little spooky. And
I think it's like
you
the
know,
earliest use of a Moog synthesizer in a rock song.
Oh, really? Nice. You know, it's just like I think of like if you were listening to the radio the year this came out, Strange Days wouldn't really sound too much like anything else you're hearing, and you know that's pretty rad. It's just got a good mix of that like psychedelic weird sound mixed with just like a good rock band, like a good 60s rock band. So it's a great record, but not quite like the masterpiece
Okay.
of whatever I put at number one.
Yeah, I mean, it came out 9 months after the self-titled,
Yeah.
so there's just no doubt that some of these songs were probably laying around during that recording. Maybe they were all already written. You know what I mean? Who knows? Maybe you do, Dan. But
I don't remember off the top of my head.
but you know, the sound is very much the same. I mean, Jim sounds exactly like he does on that self-titled. Like it would be a struggle if you really didn't know much about the Doors to try to pinpoint whether this was their first record or their second record. You know what I mean? But the difference is, and the reason why this is like my number 3 is that overall the songs just aren't as strong as that first record. Yes, When the Music's Over is absolutely worth the price of admission. You should, I mean, this is the song you should absolutely listen to if you're going to listen to anything from this record. You know, Love Me Two Times, good song, great song. You know,
Great song.
I love Moonlight Drive. That was one of my favorites.
People Are Strange I really loved that when I was young.
But then you have like Unhappy Girl, Horse Latitudes, you kind of already mentioned. You know, My Eyes Have Seen You. Okay, I can't wait to see it.
like that one.
Come on, skip. I want When the Music's Over. Just get on with it. You know. Like,
I mean, here's my thing is that, and I'll jump ahead. This is my number 2, actually. I already said my number 3 was LA Woman, and my number 2, Strange Days. And, you know, it's weird because it definitely sounds like an album of outtakes from the first album. Mm-hmm. It just so happens that first album, spoiler alert, is one of the best albums ever fucking made. Yeah. So this is, you know, outtakes from the sessions that made one of the greatest pieces of popular music ever. And I think a bunch of this stuff is, you know, kind of worthy of that, especially When the Music's Over. But think about this, you know, like the riff from When the Music's Over is basically just Soul Kitchen. It's like almost the same song completely. And they got 2 perfect songs out of the same idea. And I think they were actually pretty good at that. They were kind of like, they remind me of the Strokes or something, where it's just like they come out fully formed, and then all they could really do was riff on the thing that they had invented.
Yeah.
And they were good enough that they got, you know, I think there's a lot of filler and stuff as you get through these albums, but let's say they got a total of 3 LPs, at least 3 or 4 LPs worth of like great music and some of the best music of the decade. And, you know, I find this album doesn't have any flow at all and doesn't, you know, other than the, you know, thank God they were smart enough to end it with When the Music's Over. I don't know how hard that was to figure out, but it has no flow at all and really just does sound like a bunch of outtakes. But then if you just kind of think about it, you know, you mentioned a couple of the weak ones, Darren, but other than the ones you mentioned, these would all be like in the top 500 songs of the 60s, I think. Like at least half of this record. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Maybe we should have put together like the best Doors album from the songs.
I was thinking that.
Like that would have been
just
fun.
like we did with Weezer.
Exactly.
Yeah, when we talk about the sequencing, one thing that really bugs me on this, My Eyes Have Seen You, and then I Can't See Your Face in My Mind. Don't put the 2, like they had the good sense to split up Strange Days and People Are Strange. Split up the 2 songs about seeing things also.
I like on I always like on Waiting for the Sun, you know, it's like, you know, summer's almost gone, and you're like, oh no, and it's like wintertime love, like, oh, phew, okay, doesn't matter that summer is gone, you know, everything's gonna be all right, like immediately. That has to be on purpose, but you're right. Okay, so anything else to say about this record? This was both of your number 3s and my number 2. We can refer back to it, but yeah, go on.
I would say that this one, my favorite cover of all their records. I think this one has the coolest cover. I like, it's just this weird cavalcade of people, but then I like they sneak the poster of the band in the back. I don't know, just my favorite cover.
Yeah.
I don't
know. I don't know if it can beat the first one, but yeah, this is a fine record, I think, and I think we can touch back on it. But all right, I've given my number 2. I guess I can kind of figure out, Dan, what is your number 2?
My number 2 is L.A. Woman.
Interesting. I'm surprised that you would like this one so much because it's not, it's a little more traditional, maybe, or do you not see it that way?
Yeah, I know. It is weird that I like this record so much. But in fact, like throughout my entire life of liking the Doors, I've always kind of gone back and forth between this one and the first one being my favorite.
Wow.
Like honestly, I don't know what it is about this record. It's just really dope. In fact, when I was a young lad in high school, I had the first Doors record. That was the first one I got. And then I bought like the box set that had all the CDs. And Darren was already into the Doors. And I told him I had got this. And he was explaining them all to me. And he said, when you get to LA Woman, it's going to sound like Jim has a beard. Because he does. And if that's I remember that was probably like fucking like 15 years ago or something, maybe more than that. And I still when I listen to this record, I always think sounds like that motherfucker's got a beard. And,
it does.
I like a good beard, I guess. But I mean, it's like a weird, like distorted version of the blues. I have always sort of had an affinity for the blues, and this record just like takes it and makes it a little weird, makes it a little dirty. And I don't know. I just really like this record a lot.
Yeah. I mean, so Darren, you had this at number 4. Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if we mentioned that much negative stuff about it when we were discussing it earlier, but I mean, why so low? Why wouldn't it reach number 2 for you? Do you find it a little ordinary?
Yeah, I mean,
like a little bit better Morrison Hotel or something?
I think it's a lot better Morrison Hotel, but
okay,
a lot of the Jim Morrison, mythology just seems gone. You know what I mean? I know he has like that whole idea of like celebration of the Lizard King, all this sort of stuff that like I cringe about. If I think about myself and how big of a fan I was back then, it's just all gone. You know what I mean? Like you don't see
that's kind of true.
You don't see great posters of bearded Jim Morrison. You see posters of like the shirtless young Jim who was just 2 years younger from the bearded Jim Morrison. But like it's a great record. It's fun, but like this could be a different band almost. You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't feel like the original band, that's why I'm really surprised, Dan, that you would go from like this record to their debut as being your favorite.
Yeah
I mean, so Dan, you said that you found Morrison Hotel like kind of ordinary, like maybe most bands could have done this and you wouldn't listen to it and think, well, this is obviously one of the best bands of the 60s. What makes LA Woman so different?
Yeah, I think that it's just, like I said, the Morrison Hotel is just sort of ordinary rock songs with like a blues tinge. Here, I think we've got like a distorted version of the blues, like almost like a sort of like proto-punk version of the blues here. And, I just love that, like, I love taking, like when anyone takes like a form, especially a form that's like known for being, real, about technically good and everything, and distorting it. Not to say that they don't play well on this record or anything. It's just like there's some dirt here that you wouldn't hear on a blues record. The lyrics get weird, as Jim would do. It's just this like nightmare blues album, and I don't know.
I mean, I don't know.
I've always loved this record.
I feel like there's definitely some tracks on here that are getting close to like dad rockish. Even like "L.A. Woman," which is like a great song. I mean, my uncle and my dad, like they They love that song, you know. They think of the Doors,
Yeah.
and they'll quote "L.A. Woman" before they'll quote "Light My Fire." You know what I mean?
I mean, here's my thing, and we'll get into this, but you know, the Doors are they're so influential, I think, and if you don't respect them, you know, you think they're lame dad rock, like, you really ought to think twice about that, because I think what you're getting at, Dan, is that, you know, think about somebody like Nick Cave. Nick Cave is basically, you know, he's like a disciple of Jim Morrison. I mean, just completely, you know? And so it sounds like what you're saying is that this is kind of like, you know, it's like if Nick Cave played the blues, which he does, and he plays them like in a, you know, way only Nick Cave can. And it's something like dark. There's something dark about it. There's like a dark underbelly. It's like almost post-punk blues. And I do hear that on this record. And when I think about like, you know, the whole like City at Night part of LA Woman, I mean, the way he's yelling that, it just sounds so much like somebody like Ian Curtis, another disciple of Jim Morrison. He could sing that exact hook, you know, the same way he would do like on Transmission or something. There, you know, I totally get that there's something that was missing from Morrison Hotel is that kind of like darkness that the Doors used to have. It's like they kind of rediscover it here. Do you think I'm on the right track, Dan?
Yeah, exactly. I think Nick Cave's a good example, and I love Nick Cave basically for the same reasons that I love this record. Yeah, I guess because, you know, this is when the legal problems and everything like really started mounting for Jim. Basically, you know, right before he flees the country, essentially, and you know, so it brings back that like darkness and weirdness and all. Whereas like something like Morrison Hotel is just basically devoid of any of that. You know, it's just sort of a straight rock record, blues record. And here, you know, I don't think it's straight at all. It's just this weird bastardization of the blues.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to that, and maybe Darren sees it as a little more ordinary, and I think I could be persuaded of that as well. That maybe I'm like adding the stuff I already knew about the Doors and the mythology that, you know, is really cool about it. Maybe it's not here anymore, like you're saying, but I just like can't help but think about it or something.
Except when you talk about the mythology, you are forgetting the whole Mr. Mojo Rising bit. You know,
that's true.
Here we
Jim.
go.
Jim not really being dead and faking his own death, changing his name to Mr. Mojo Rising, which is a anagram of his name. So there's a little bit of mythology
here. There's some stuff in here. He's not like the sexy, young, you know, spry 25-year-old that he used to be, but you know. All right, anyway, okay, so that's your 2. I already said my 2, which is Strange Days, and what's your 2, Darren?
My number 2 is the self-titled. No, I'm just kidding. It's
I was ready to jump through this microphone.
I was just about to turn off Skype and just be gone.
No, it's Waiting for the Sun.
Okay,
and this, you know, it kind of surprised me because I remember thinking that Waiting for the Sun was always like my second favorite Doors record, even when I was young. So I thought coming back to this that it wouldn't be. But you know, we talk a lot about Strange Days and how it's like so similar to the self-titled. Then we talk about how the Soft Parade, they're running out of ideas, and Morrison Hotel are kind of like trying something a little different, a little more stripped down. Like Waiting for the Sun, I feel like is the one record where they experiment quite a bit, and I feel like it works. And the one thing that I really hang on to is Not to Touch the Earth, because I really wish that it was just all of Celebration of the Lizard, to be honest, because even though the one studio recording that I think was on that box set, Dan, is like pretty not great, that live one that I sent you a long time ago, they have all the different sections of it strung together, works really well, and I just wish that they had somehow found a way to make it happen. But anyway, so here's why. I mean, we kind of go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it is weird that they didn't get it together. It's almost like last minute, because the inside of the record is a giant picture that says "Celebration of the Lizard" with a picture of a lizard, and then the lyrics to the entire "Celebration of a Lizard." So
To me, I like to think that like the band members just weren't willing to go where Jim wanted to go. You know what I mean? Like
it does feel like that a little bit.
It was just too far. You know, like the end was just enough. When the music's over was just enough. But like Celebration of the Lizard is like literally him reciting poetry, and they're trying to like keep up, and they probably, I don't know. I just feel like there was they just collided, and they weren't able to do that. I feel like the other band members like weren't really as interested in Jim's mythology. You know what I mean? Like I think that they were.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. There's. I don't know. We can talk about that after we get through the albums. But anyway, so let me list the songs here. So Hello, I Love You, excellent. Love Street's good. Not to Touch the Earth, obviously a favorite. You guys hated on The Unknown Soldier? I fucking love that song.
The skit.
I love all the song parts.
I love it.
And then they try something different with Spanish Caravan, which I thought was cool.
I also hate how it's like, it's like The Unknown Soldier. It's like a great like minute long song or something with like a lot of just skit stuff going on. And then we go directly into Spanish Caravan, which is like a 30-second like Spanish guitar intro. It's like, can you just give me some fucking rock? Like I've been waiting so long.
Well, Unknown Soldier does close side A,
yeah.
And I feel like that's an appropriate song to close side A. And then we get up to, so like My Wild Love, I like that song. Again, they're like trying something different. You know what I mean? Like they're sort of abandoning the simple organ, guitar, drums, backing music for something a little bit different, a little more into that Jim Morrison, like, I'm like
Animal Collective-y.
Yeah, I'm like a Native American spirit thing, whatever. Like I love that. Like I feel like that gets abandoned basically after this record. All the stuff that they try here just doesn't really carry over into anything else.
Yeah, that's true.
So that was part of the reason why it's always been a favorite of mine. I totally agree that the sequencing is terrible, but I don't really listen to this record in the sense that like that I really care about the sequencing. I'm just really interested in the different songs. It's almost like a miniature White Album type of approach where they're just trying a lot of different stuff. It kind of is.
And what I've like sort of learned in the like, I don't know, some of this has come up a couple times, I think, in our episodes we've done. It's like, if you're going to do the White Album, like really you got to do it, because if you try to cram it into 40 minutes, it's going to sound terrible. Like if that's what you're going for, you got lots of different ideas and you want to experiment and stretch out, like please go onto 2 discs or something, because it's going to be a disaster if you do it on just one. And I feel like you could just shuffle this album. It wouldn't like make a difference.
Yeah.
I feel like also kind of what you were saying about the Celebration of the Lizard, I think about that too. But kind of with every song, it just kind of makes me think of like what could have been.
Oh yeah.
I'm just kind of like, I hear like Not to Touch the Earth and I'm like, wow, I wish I could have heard, like I wish I could have finished that. Or I hear like 5 to 1 and I'm like, man, would have been cool if they kind of like went in that direction a little bit more. Or, like every song just makes me think of like a make-believe record that I'm not currently.
That might be why I have it at number 2, because I'm just thinking like, this could have been so great. You know what I mean? Like, it was so close. It's really missing that long, sprawling track. I feel like if you put Celebration of the Lizard or something on here, you've got a really good contender for like a top 3 or top 2 album,
Yeah, I agree with you there.
And it does feel like after this, they just kind of like lost their way for a while. It's like they had grand plans, at least for this one, and they didn't pan out, and it just like they didn't. And I think he was actually threatening to quit the band around this time. And they convinced him, like, please don't quit. This next one's going to be so good. Trust me. It's called Soft Parade.
Yeah. Check out this song. It's called Touch Me. You're going to love it.
Yeah. Somehow he stuck around. But I think he also, there's something just like some magic is lost after this one. But there's a lot of what could have been. Okay. So we can, touch back on everything, compare and contrast. But we are at number 1. Sounds like we have a consensus. The Doors, self-titled, from 1967. Dan, do you agree with me this is just one of the best things ever made?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, there was a large portion of my teenage life where this was my favorite record. And, it's not my favorite record anymore, but it's definitely an album I'll listen to here and there to this day. And it's just fantastic. Anytime maybe I'll go a year, 2 years, 3 years, and I won't listen to it, and then I decide to throw it on, and you're just brought right back to how fantastic this is. It's nuts for this band to come out of the gate so fully formed, and so like great, just right off the bat. I mean, because even they had only been a band for a couple, I don't remember exactly how long, but not for very long before this record is recorded. It's just fantastic.
What about you, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely adore this record. I talked about how there's not too many 10 out of 10 Doors records like we were talking about. This is the one. This is the 10 out of 10 where they just nail it pretty much start to finish. It's amazing for this to be like a debut album, because in some ways this is Jim Morrison's, his peak almost. You know what I mean? Like there are moments on the record where it's like he never gets any better, and it's incredible. And so as far as like re-listening to it, like this is definitely the one album that I will always like want to come back to. And interestingly enough, my youngest son was really into the Minions movie, and they feature Break On Through to the Other Side. So he actually knows that track. Well, because they go through the 60s, like the Minions and what they were doing, and of course this is the song that like basically represents the 60s, and I think it's pretty accurate. So
I think that for me, this record. All right, I got a couple things to say. Here's my thing: if you like don't think that this is one of the best records ever made, like maybe you went through it in high school and now you're like, that's kind of embarrassing, that's dad rock or whatever, his poetry's embarrassing, I think you cannot be farther from the truth. It doesn't make any goddamn sense to think that the Velvet Underground and Nico is cool and this is not. Like, completely agree. To me, this is like just as good as the Velvet Underground and Nico. I mean, it's like a revelation. And pay attention to that date, okay? January 4th, 1967, okay? So we're practically in 1966. What in 1966 sounded like this? I mean, the end, it's as dark and like foreboding and psychosexual, and there are just levels to it, the way it like stretches out and uses empty space. I mean, this is as good as Venus and Furs by the Velvet Underground, Heroin, okay? And yet it's almost a year early, all right? It's as dark as any Joy Division song, okay? And it's like more than a decade early. It's, the best Nick Cave song that Nick Cave ever wishes he could write, and I fucking love Nick Cave, okay? I mean, and that's just like one song. If we go into like Break On Through to the Other Side, I mean, we are so far before punk, but that song just rips like harder than any Sex Pistols song, Light My Fire. I know this isn't like the coolest reference, but like that jam, like the Grateful Dead wishes they jammed that well. I mean, there is not a note that I would change on that entire instrumental passage of Light My Fire. I think this is just, can you believe that? This is practically 1966, and it invents like all cool music that everybody likes.
No, I mean, it really does. In fact, this is basically a proto-punk record, but nobody ever lists it as such. So much so that in 1967, right after this record came out, they played a prom at the University of Michigan, and Iggy Pop was in the audience. And at the time, he was a drummer, and he saw, this was another famous disaster of the Doors. Jim was drunk out of his fucking mind, flailing about on stage, and Iggy saw that and quit playing drums and decided to invent punk rock because of this of this record, essentially. I don't know why this doesn't get listed with the Velvet Underground and everything. I guess it is like, if you pay attention to what Jim says, it's frequently embarrassing. But on this record, it's not as bad as like what it would become, because on this one, there's not anything that's too crazy. I mean, the end, like, it flirts with it, but I don't think it's too cringy lyric wise.
Still based on something else. It's not like completely him, his own.
Yeah, exactly.
Like off the deep end. You know what I mean? So I think it's fair. I think this is like sort of like a rocket ship taking off, just an explosion, of like great ideas in a scene like you had sort of set up, Gabe, like that just didn't exist. Like there wasn't anything out there.
There's nothing.
And they're just writing the book as it's happening on this record. You know what I mean? Like they're at the forefront, literally at the forefront, doing this, and it's incredible.
I mean, another thing I love is that, there's something, I can't even explain this properly, but like the 60s, there just wasn't this really idea of like a front man. It wasn't like a thing. Just in the early 60s, right? It's like this kind of the mid 60s. It's like always these pop groups. It's like the singer is meant to kind of like be just part of the song, not stand out too much.
Exactly.
And by the time we get to the 70s, we have like, obvious frontmen. Okay. I think that, Jim Morrison is the first front man, because what are the Rolling Stones doing in 1966? A lot of people think of like, Mick Jagger as the prototypical frontman, and I would agree with that. But in like 1966, they're kind of like a pop Beatles-ish band,
right?
Because even the Beatles, there's no frontman.
Yeah, it's not
they're
frontman
playing
thing.
Instruments and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're part of the song. This is like a genuine frontman where his like charisma and his stage presence like drives the whole thing. And we talked about it earlier, but like even the parts where he's not singing, like this whole 5-minute stretch in Light My Fire, he's just like, his presence is there, and he's coming, and it's like he is, he's like the first Mick Jagger, he's the first Robert Plant, he's the first David Bowie. I don't think you have any of those guys without. This is like the blueprint. I can't believe anybody disrespects this record. And you're right that it's got like a post-punk vibe. It's got a very experimental sort of avant-garde vibe, because just the idea of this this arrangement where it's like organ is almost the whole thing, and it's a lot of these like kind of, the drums are sparse often, and the guitar is super sparse, like often just sort of peppering. I can't even think of that many bands that sort of took this up, but all I can think of is like the post-punk world, where they were like, well, bass will be, the low end will create all this empty space. It took like 10 years for anybody to kind of catch up with the Doors.
Yeah, this record, if you didn't know when this came out, it's hard to place. The only reason it's easy is because Break On Through and Light My Fire were such big hits that everyone knows they're from the 60s. But if you didn't, if those songs didn't exist and you didn't know about them, it would be hard to place this record in the 60s. I think it's much more of a 70s sound, but I think the 70s sound like that because of this record. So, it's hard to say. But yeah, Jim is definitely the first front man. It's crazy. I don't know. I guess it's because everybody gets a little too into the Doors when they're young. And then I think you just kind of, because you look back and like a lot of the stuff you liked when you were young probably sucks, and so I think like everybody just sort of unfairly assumes that this one's in that pile. But
I also think that they influenced like everybody, including dad rock. They're a huge part of the dad rock tradition, and so when you're in high school, you're kind of like in this going through this dad rock phase, this classic rock thing. And you're like, oh yeah, Jim Morrison, Robert Plant, these are like the coolest frontmen ever. And, like blah, blah, blah. And then you kind of just sort of associate him in that group and maybe like throw it all out. But then later, if you come back to it and you kind of realize like, now I love Swans, holy shit, Jim Morrison is like the god of Swans, I like Nick Cave. I like all this other stuff that, I think that it's easy to forget, but if you go back and you just look at him in the context of a different tradition, you'll realize like he's there too. You kind of feel me on all this, Darren?
Yeah, definitely. And I was going to sort of add from a different angle, like whoever, publicist or whatever, like thought to, sexualize Jim Morrison in such a way and make these like incredible, all these like photographs and just, like I'm sure a lot of that was Jim's own idea, but I also think that whoever was like thinking about this sort of thing, like they really nailed it, like they kind of invented and helped create that persona that like just goes so far beyond his death. You know what I mean? Like you can't think of the 60s without seeing an image of Morrison like that, you know?
That's because the person who did all that is Danny Fields. He was their manager and the person who discovered them. And he also discovered the Ramones, the Stooges, and basically every other great band from the 60s and early 70s. There's a documentary about him on, I think it's on Netflix.
He's the guy I'm talking about then, for sure.
Yep.
That's a huge part of all this, you know?
Also, do you guys agree with me that I was saying earlier, there's something so amazing about this album where it's all there. Like all of these things that the Doors were kind of into somehow are effortlessly combined. So like obviously the blues are a big part, but it's weird how for Jim Morrison, like Backdoor Man, which is a cover, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like a Delta blues kind of a thing. For him, like the poetry of that like old blues tradition is the same as like the French symbolist poetry tradition, like Rimbaud or something. It's the same world somehow as like Greek tragedy, the Oedipus myth and everything. It's like he's effortlessly doing this. And then of course there's musical aspects, like there's jazz influence swirling through all of this. There's really, again, talk about like how ahead of their time they are. Something like The Crystal Ship or End of the Night is, the most psychedelic thing that you would have been able to hear in January of 1967. But there's like these psychedelics, there's Delta blues, there's like this gothic kind of romanticism thing that Nico would totally run with in the coming years. Greek tragedy, this shaman, like Native American thing. What I'm asking is like, it all feels so effortlessly combined here. And then for some reason in every album after this, they're like separate entities. Usually it's like, oh, this will be our song that's like kind of chamber pop. And this will be like our jazzy proggy song. And this will be our bluesy song,
Yeah, I don't know like what causes that, was it just an accident that all of it ends up on this record? Or, did they get caught up in each part of that and try to split, think that, this thing was better than the other and try to do it on the record? Is it just so organic on this one that they couldn't replicate it?
Right. I wonder, when you're writing your first album and you're so full of like great ideas, you have nothing to compare it to, nothing to go back against, like you're just, everything sounds good. I think everyone is like fully inspired. One of the great things, like you mentioned earlier, like Dan, the Doors were pretty great live. They have a lot of really great live tracks, and that energy that he brings on the stage is right here on this record too. It feels like
it feels like a live album.
Yeah,
almost.
like it's all there. And then so in the subsequent albums after that, I imagine the struggle of like, well, how do we top what we've done? How do we get past this? How do we make this not sound like the end or Light My Fire, whatever? Like, and we'll probably talk about this a bit more, but like their style, mainly an organ, blues guitarist, a jazzy kind of drummer, it doesn't really change very much in the subsequent records. Like there's a little bit of new stuff introduced, but I feel like there was like a struggle there, whereas bands like the Beatles and others they so naturally progressed and changed and so cleverly introduced new instrumentation, whereas I feel like the Doors just never were able to do that successfully,
And I feel like it's almost like once you have to think about it, it's like impossible because just imagine, it's like they just did it and they're young and they just did it. But just imagine sitting down and making a list. If I was like, all right, Darren and Dale, we're going to start a musical project. I want to combine Greek tragedy with like kind of gothic romanticism with like French symbolist poetry, Delta blues, kind of like a circus vibe, shaman, Native American stuff, and jazz. And you tried to write a song, like, okay, let's get started doing that. It would just be fucking impossible,
right.
But somehow they kind of just did it there. And then it was like the bubble was burst because they were like, oh shit, how do we put all that stuff in another song? I don't know. It just makes this thing so special.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you.
All right, well, we got through our list. They were not that different. I think we should review them. You want to count yours down again, Dan?
Yeah, I went Soft Parade, last place, followed by Morrison Hotel, followed by Waiting for the Sun, followed by Strange Days, LA Woman, and The Doors, self-titled.
What about you, Darren?
It was Soft Parade, Morrison Hotel, LA Woman, Strange Days, Waiting for the Sun, and then The Doors, self-title.
And I got number 6, The Soft Parade, 5, Morrison Hotel, 4, Waiting for the Sun, 3, LA Woman, 2, Strange Days, and number 1, The Doors. So, what did we learn from this exercise, from revisiting The Doors in these 2 weeks?
That minus a couple tracks here and there, The Doors are a great band and don't deserve the sort of bad rap looking back that a lot of people give them.
I feel like they are just okay at this point. I mean, I love the self-titled record, don't get me wrong, but like as a whole, something that I was thinking about asking you guys, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer now, but like, The Doors work really well when you're in your youth, but let's say you just missed it somehow in your youth. Is this a band that you think, a 30-something or 40-something could actually get into, like with a completely fresh start? Or will they immediately be turned off by, like Morrison's persona?
I think the self-titled you could get into. But I mean, that is a really good question. Is it one of those sort of you had to be there at a certain time kind of things? Maybe, but I'm 31 now, and re-listening to these records, I enjoyed them. But yeah, I mean, I do have like those nostalgia feelings from listening to it younger. I don't know. I think the self-titled you could get into, probably LA Woman, maybe Strange Days. Everything else, yeah, maybe a little bit of difficulty.
See, I think that for some reason I have no weight whatsoever, no burden of cringiness or anything anymore. It's like I went through that period where I was like, Jim Morrison is a dickhead, and I just don't listen to the Doors anymore. And then it was like I kind of revisited them and was just so shocked at how good, especially that first album is, and I don't even find it embarrassing at all anymore, and I don't really think about the myth of Jim Morrison when I'm listening. It's like, stuff like I don't know, how there's just always this sort of rediscovery. So when it comes to the Beach Boys, I'm always meeting people that are really into kind of the 70s Beach Boys albums, and it's not that they're great, but it's just that you get these kind of passionate people that are there's a bunch of songs on here that are really, really good. It's really cool. I feel like you could do that with basically any of the albums after the self-titled, and I think people will kind of come back and be like, wow, Strange Days, at least half of this thing is just complete gems. Same with Waiting for the Sun, and so on and so on. And there'll be that gem hunting thing that'll happen, but I think people gotta wake up to the
hey, wake up.
Yeah, there you go. To the first album, and just realize that it's a masterpiece that writes the rest of history of the coolest music that you like. If you are listening to it and you're this sounds like dad rock, just you're wrong, and you should just I don't know, listen to Swans, The Seer once, and then throw the end on right afterwards and be like, holy shit, this is the same tradition stretching all the way through. If you got a problem, it's on you.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I kind of disagree. I feel like if you didn't really catch this in your youth when you're sort of, forming your own thoughts on things and kind of understanding ego and your own whatever, just coming into adulthood, I guess. If you miss that connection with Jim Morrison, I feel like you'll never truly dive in all the way. You could probably appreciate the first record, like you mentioned, Dan, but I think almost immediately after listening to that, first record, you'll be disappointed by everything else. Like, you just won't be willing to give it a chance. You know, like when I was young, Jim Morrison was like a god. You know what I mean? Like everything he did, everything he wrote was just like, I just wanted to be him almost, you know, like I wanted to understand what his mindset, and I thought that he had somehow unlocked something crazy. But so every album, you know, you mentioned, Gabe, like, yeah, there's some gems on here and there. You know what? I didn't care. Like, the whole album was great to me in those days. Like, I appreciated all of it. I don't know if they're strong enough to hold up without that mythology kind of backing it. You know, like, I don't know. I feel like if you've missed it, you'd have a really hard time appreciating it the same way that we do.
I don't know, man. I think it's cool because it's like, you know, people, I mean, I don't know why people get like upset that Jim Morrison considered himself a poet. You know, it's like Patti Smith considers herself a poet and she's a badass. Kim Gordon, you know, is like a poet in my mind. And Jim Morrison is like a poet. And maybe there's some like, you know, and I also found listening in these past 2 weeks, it was kind of fun because maybe when I was in high school, I thought he was like really, you know, just really cool and like really romantic or something. And then I'm listening now to some of these love songs and I'm like, he's kind of like creepy and stalkerish, you know? And
calling people like little girls, that really, I don't think that would hold up today.
But I don't think that was like, I really don't believe that was completely unintentional. Like, I think a lot of his like sort of first person narrations about love are like intentionally troubling and like problematic in the sense that he's like a wreck and sometimes predatory and sometimes totally desperate. And, you know, it's like, maybe you just listen to his, like his myth, his character. I mean, just listen to it like kind of critically if you have to, but it's still like, I don't know. Why should we shit on musicians who want to like write interesting things? I just don't understand that.
I don't think that I'm wanting to do that. I just, you know, when you read into the backstory and you read how he was, like, in a lot of ways, you might come up with just like, well, he was kind of just a drunk and, you know, took a lot of drugs and then would just kind of act like that person at a party who like went way too far and was being obnoxious. You know what I mean? Like, I could totally see that being a thing. And like, some people will say, well, that's just him. You know, he's just above all of you, whatever. Like,
yeah, but can't you like listen? Like, that's what I'm saying is like, can't you now listen with like a critical distance? So when he's like, you know, saying that, you know, saying stuff like that, you can be like, wow, this is like a view into the mind of somebody who's a complete fucking mess, and that's interesting. You know, like I like movies that are about people that I don't admire. You know, so like why? You see what I'm saying? Like, why do I have to admire Jim Morrison?
I think what arises is that like when we were all younger, like, you know, we thought it was so cool, you know, it's like his recklessness. It was like, you know, the same reason like that allure of punk, you know, gets you so much when you're a kid. You know, he was just like sort of the ultimate rebel. But then when you grow up, you learn, you know, like, oh no, he's just an addict, you know, an alcoholic that is a mess of a person. And, you know, so he loses that like coolness and the mythology. I mean, I don't think that takes away from the music at all, but like,
no.
With a lot of bands, and I mean, maybe this is just me. You know, I'm someone I get like, you know, real into bands. I'll read books about them. I'll read about, you know, the certain members. You know, I'll read books about or something. And like, you know, Jim is sort of perfect for that. But again, like, you know, some other bands, like, you know, I was super into like John Lennon when I was a kid, and like, you grow up and like John Lennon's like. You see that he's like a little, you know, he's got some flaws and stuff that maybe you don't see when you're younger. But like, I feel like he's just as cool now to me as he was when I was 13. Whereas like Jim was like the coolest person in the world to me when I was 13, 14.
Sure.
And then, you know, now it's like, no, I mean, like, I think Darren said, like, he's like that person at a party that like went too far. And like, if you're drunk, sometimes you're like, oh fuck, I remember when, you know, Jim was shitting on the sofa, you know, or something, and you're like, that was crazy. But then like, if you're the sober one at the party, you're like, you know, what a fucking asshole. And like, I think now we're the sober ones at the party. Yeah, and
but it doesn't take away from the music.
I
don't want you to think that I don't like the music because I'm just too busy thinking that he's a drunk. That's really not the case. In fact, My favorite songs are when they really lean into that. We talked about the sprawling poem.
Yeah.
Those are the best songs, and there's actually not enough of that. Especially in their later records, they kind of go away from that, and I feel like it hurts those records.
Yeah, I just think he's don't like. I know that probably all those like famous biographies, that came out like in the 80s and 90s and stuff, they really glorify his behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's unhealthy to buy into that. But if you can look at it from a distance and just be like, wow, this is like a fascinating look into like somebody who was really, really kind of a mess and, really hurtful to other people and to himself ultimately. It just doesn't have to be cringy. That's just how I feel about the lyrical stuff. But, I guess we're going a little bit over. I do want to ask quickly, you mentioned older people, Darren, people who missed the teenage years, but whoever you are, whatever age you are, is every Doors album something that you should listen to? Are the Doors such that even like Soft Parade, people should hear it?
I don't think so. I don't think Soft Parade, Morrison Hotel, those ones are only for if you get real into it. I don't think those are in any way classics or must listens.
You can write the history of rock music or pop music without mentioning Soft Parade or Morrison Hotel.
I know you're trying to walk me into some trap here. And I'm trying to figure out what that trap is so I can answer correctly. I think you can definitely, I won't say definitely, but I think you can more easily write off Morrison Hotel. I just can't really think of anything, maybe like shitty rock records that come. I can't think of anything good that comes from Morrison Hotel. Soft Parade, I will give you, like you mentioned when we were talking about that record, the whole chamber pop thing. That's probably got some roots in the Soft Parade, and that's worthwhile. But like, you don't have to listen to everything that is the root of what you like. Things can be rooted from shitty things.
Sure.
I feel like you've got to hear "Touch Me." If anything, forget the rest of the Soft Parade, but that song is that has
you'll
to
catch it on the radio though.
Man, that sax solo is to die for. I swear to God.
So if you're starting out with the Doors and you happen to make the mistake of listening to like a greatest hits record, you'll get "Touch Me" on there. I'm quite confident in that.
But
exactly. I think I did that actually.
Yeah,
I was thinking about
the
it.
Same thing, maybe.
Because I used to have a greatest hits album, and it's like a bunch of these records I know like a bunch of the songs really well, and then the other ones I'm like always kind of forgetting about them. I must have, I definitely listened like later, but it's just funny because back in those days I was remembering, I could basically afford to buy like one CD a week or every 2 weeks. And if I already had like half the songs on a greatest hits, there's no way I'm spending $13 to get like the other 5 songs,
You remember those
I was just not buying that.
You remember those 20th century records or whatever?
Oh yeah. It was always like a black and white picture, and then it was like silver writing on the side. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I may have had the Doors 20th century or something like that.
Nice. I think you need a greatest hits. Okay, we're way over. Do you guys forgive Morrison for whipping his dick out? I think that's what we were trying to get to the bottom of today.
Yeah, that was the whole point. Well, I listened to the Miami show today, the audio. I didn't hear any dicks. Yeah,
no,
I didn't hear
any dick being taken out, any zipper sound or anything.
No,
like that.
there was no zipper. It didn't sound like a dick came out to me. I think he was fine. I don't think the state of Florida should have given him a pardon because he shit talks Florida during that whole thing, and so that's a little annoying. So I forgive him for whipping his dick out. But I say don't pardon him.
Okay. All right. That's fair.
All right. Well, since that's settled, we forgive him for whipping his dick out. So next week, 2 weeks rather. We do this every 2 weeks. I keep forgetting that. We're not sure what we're doing yet. Did anybody else whip their dick out? Maybe we could do it on that.
Are there any other anniversaries?
Let us know, in fact, if you know of any dicks that were whipped. popshieldpod@gmail.com. If you like the show, help us out. Subscribe. Leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Stay connected. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff is at Pop Shield Pod, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See ya.
So long.